end of the meeting when Delegate Sickles and Delegate Jones are able to be here. They are both strong, particularly Delegate Sickles has some must-do conflicts.
Okay.
Good morning, Eleanor Dollar.
Good morning.
How are you?
Is everybody all right? Have a good weekend?
I won $10 in a Super Bowl pool,
Wow,
so I
I
am
tell you what,
fine.
Maybe you can get into the lottery and dang and parlay that into
I'm telling you what.
something really big.
Did you know what you were doing, or was
No,
this
absolutely.
That's all right, I won't ask that question.
Like I say, these kind of had a great game for a change. I think it's the main thing.
Suzanne, was that the
Well,
first one?
Yes.
I went and did, 'cause I always take my iPad. I got my little book, I left my iPad at home today.
You guys want any goodies
So I'm like,
before I leave?
Oh my
Good
gosh.
morning.
Go ahead.
We love when you visit us.
Sure,
and we're
Ronnie
so
does.
funny.
Yeah.
With some bun. I got in here.
I'll
I
hold
had
this
fire.
This is for Delegate
Thank you,
Kumar.
sir.
And I'll move away when he gets here.
Thank you. Give these to the captain. Here, you guys did a great job. Sure?
I'm
Yeah?
gonna be.
The banana on one side, cream cheese on the other.
Thank your wife.
Thank you.
Delicious.
I'm good, thank you. Some of the heavy lifting. Didn't save.
What in the world is it?
Wherewithal. We're gonna have to start saving our pennies.
Okay, I just got a text from somebody. I did.
That's from Jessica
Yeah,
behind you.
yeah.
That's before you walked in the door.
That was me.
Yeah.
Morning, Delegate.
Good morning.
Good, how are you?
As I get older, I know my back.
Good.
You're here, where you're
Yeah,
supposed
I
to
got
be.
here early, doing stuff, so I'm pretty wide awake now, but I'll crash and burn about 2 o'clock.
I saw you come in.
Do you need some room here?
Yeah.
Oh, good, as long as I'm not
I like to get here and kind of go through everything, see what's
Well, plus at 6:30, traffic is easy.
sometimes, well, absolutely, so that's, sometimes you get a bunch of emails come in late, you know, about,
Right.
yep, today you gotta present a bill.
Right.
I'm always kind of paranoid that they're gonna slip by me.
Sam, what do you do? Hey, how you doing, Peter? Yeah, I got those right there. Okay. Oh, okay. See. Okay, okay. All right, good. What do you do?
I brought that door open just to keep. Because your left one's wanting to shut it, but it just, there's so many people in here. We'll see, but if it starts to aggravate you, let me know. But it will keep it cooler in here for sure. 6.
Number 4.
I'm not going anywhere, but somebody's talking to me right at the door.
Okay.
So your mic is on right now. That's what that ring means. They're not super sensitive, but it just will help.
Where's the mic, this thing here?
Yes, so to turn it on, you hit that sort of Wi-Fi looking button.
Thing here on the left there, yeah.
You get it?
Right here.
That's the one. So if it turns green, there you go. Then the mic's on.
Hello. It worked. Alright.
Okay.
some in the like there's a big line, so I don't know if they happened to.
And I'm sure they're being talked to. Joe Lindsay's outside, he's coming in.
Wyatt, Jessica.
Yeah, there is quite the line outside.
And the last block, so just be aware of
There's
that.
Joe.
He was here before, so he was in our county. And it'll be Jessica.
Still looking for him.
Good morning.
So they pressed the
It was
button.
the last minute.
I mean, really, unless you're that's why I like to lunch house.
So it's showing it's the middle one that's not lit is green to go on.
It's a little Wi-Fi,
Middle
but
where it's not lit.
well, actually, his is a little different than
Oh,
yours.
okay.
So that turns it on, and pressing it again turns
Sorry,
it off.
it was different.
It's different. Yours is a little different.
She knows what she's doing. You can listen to me.
What middle one does not look?
Just so you know, Marjorie was in here earlier. It was looking for you just to get an agenda ready for this afternoon. She wanted me to tell you.
Right here.
Yep.
Can I find her when I leave? Ground floor.
Down where the committee is, like right outside of that. Or if you wanna have like your hours and things all down there, or make sure she's in office. You have to have two.
Thank you.
Okay.
So,
Would you like some?
No, thank you.
Oh, I have a top tier SCI clearance. There would be no wait and I've never even done never. So boring.
Having a quorum, the meeting will come to order. I want to repeat an announcement that I made earlier on, that the peer-to-peer bills, HB 891, 892, and 1539 will be heard later because of conflicts of the patrons when Delegate Sickles and Delegate Jones are able to be here. Therefore, I'm going to start with the patrons who are here, and I believe that Delegate Tran was here first, and Delegate Tran is here on tax administration bills. Delegate Tran, would you like to start with 1219?
thank you, Madam Chair.
Have you made any announcement about how many minutes each patron has?
The last block where we have 10 bills, our budget impact, those bills will be heard with 2 minutes per bill. There's not money in the budget, but we are very happy to hear the idea, so perhaps in the future, but at this point, there isn't money in the budget, and so they will be 2 minutes apiece. But on these bills, there will be a varied amount of time.
Madam Chair, can I start with perhaps some of my easier bills?
Sure.
House Bill 1220,
1220?
we have a substitute for that. Maybe while council is passing out the substitute, and if I can just explain, this issue came to light when a constituent of mine reached out because her daughter received a notification from the tax department that she owed not only back taxes, but also that she had interest that had accrued on those taxes. She had made a change to her federal tax income and didn't realize that she subsequently needed to amend her Virginia state income tax return, and that the interest started accruing the day that she should have done that, which is, I believe, you get a grace period, so it would have been June 1st. And my constituent said, had her daughter known that she owed additional taxes to Virginia, she would have paid that, and would not have, wanted to accrue additional interest. And so what the substitute does is that we try to think about ways to notify Virginians who are working really hard, trying to pay their taxes, so that they could get a sense of if they owe additional taxes that they have, that the interest accrued starting then. But in talking with the tax department, we realized that that was clearly difficult to do, and we'll tackle that in the future. But what, based on a suggestion from the tax department, is that there are occasions when our tax department staff are able to waive penalties associated with late payments and such, that to give the department similar discretion to waive interest when they deem that this is, was a kind of like a good faith error. And so the substitute, you'll see the language on lines 19 to 21, would provide the department with a similar discretion where they're able to waive penalties now to waive accrued interest in these situations.
Thank you. Any questions of the patron?
Just a quick question. On Delegate Tran, I'm looking at this and it says that the return was made in good faith, and of course the example that you gave, that there wasn't return but made at all. So would that qualify under this language? Because obviously good faith, this one.
I will turn to my tax colleagues who might be able to help explain how they interpret good faith and their discretion, which is language that's currently used for criminal penalties.
Madam Chair, Delegate Fowler, it depends. It's really kind of a facts and circumstances determination of good faith. So the circumstances highlighted by Delegate Tran, I think would qualify for this. But again, it just depends on we don't have the full facts in this case.
Well, this is true.
So it just depends.
Any further questions? Anyone here to speak for the bill? Opposed to the bill? Committee operates by motion. Oh, I'm sorry, we have to adopt the substitute? So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm sure.
Yes.
It does have a fiscal impact in terms of oversight, at least.
We have not the chairman of appropriations hasn't required that. It's assumed that this kind of impact could be absorbed by the department. Move to report.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of reporting HB 1220 as substitute, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, on the
Well,
board.
you gotta vote. Sorry.
I just need one cup of coffee.
Close. Everyone voted who cares to vote? The HB 1220 passes 6-1.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. If we could chat about HB 1703. We have so many bills. Council, can you remind me if we have a substitute?
We have technical amendments.
We have technical amendments for 1703. Thank you.
Move the technical amendments.
Second.
This one does.
So this is amendment, we need to adopt.
So move the
Just doing a
technical
motion in a second. I'm sorry.
I'm just
She knows what she's doing.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The technical amendments opposed? He just moved it.
We were saying the same thing at the same time, and then I said, "Oh, I'm just gonna throw him under the bus."
Delegate Tran, would you like to speak to the bill?
Yes,
As
ma'am.
amended.
Thank you. So you may recall that in last session in 2019, we moved up the sunset date for the telework tax credit that was in the bill per a study from JLARC. I'm putting all my cards on the table. And I had constituents who reached out and noted that while this program had been underutilized in the past, and that was part of the recommendation from JLARC to move up the sunset date, there may have been reasons for that. The telework tax credit, as it was set up originally, was a pretty complicated credit program compared to other tax credit programs operated by the Department of Tax. So it required somebody to do a pre-application in the fall before the tax year that they're interested in obtaining the credit. save their receipts during the tax year and then file, the paperwork afterwards, that then require them to extend their taxes while they're waiting to see if they are approved for the credit at the end. So if you're looking at tax year 2020, you had to file your paperwork in like September, October of 2019, go through 2020 with your expenses, file your paperwork in, the late spring, early summer of 2021, and extend your taxes while you're waiting for a response from the Department of Tax in the summer of 2021. So, there's a sense from, that complicated timeline made it difficult for businesses to stick with it and apply for the program and get their tax credit at the end. So what we've tried to do is revamp the program to streamline it and make it much more aligned with other tax credit programs where you apply for the credit when you submit your tax returns, right? And so, in hoping that that would make it easier for businesses to participate, I think we all see the benefits of telework. It allows, the flexibility we talk a lot about in terms of having, kind of more work-life balance. It takes cars off the roads and helps relieve congestion, which is also good for our environment, and allows our employers to tap into a workforce throughout Virginia, not just in their location. We've proposed that reinstituting the telework tax credit program for just 2 tax years, this year and next year, just to see what the take-up would be, and if we could be more successful in participation with a more streamlined program. It's still capped at $1 million, which is what it was before.
Thank you, and again, it does have a budget impact. I should have announced that first, and so it's basically a 2 minutes. We need to be quick on these bills. But are there any questions of the patron?
Just one quick question. Is there a budget amendment with this, or?
Do you have a budget amendment?
I said impact statement, but I don't see a budget. Some numbers in there, but.
So so it says budget amendment is not necessary from the impact statement.
Okay.
Is
Is there
this a tax
anyone here
credit?
to speak for a bill? Is there anyone here to speak against the bill? What is the will of the committee?
Move the report and refer to appropriation.
Report and,
Refer to appropriation, I assume, do we?
is there a second?
Second,
Is there, any discussion?
and that's what the amendment.
All those in favor of
sorry, just
reporting and referring
Just a minute, I'm gonna add the amendment.
as amended?
So I just wanted to clarify, so our fifth says that there's no budget amendment necessary, so it still goes to approps?
Okay, we'll see
Okay.
how approps responds.
Okay.
All those in favor, please cast your vote on the board. The bill is reported and referred as amended. A recommendation to report and refer as amended, yea 6, nay 2. And you still have another.
Oh, I never appeared before you all until this year, I'm so excited. All right, my last one is, I think, by far most complicated one, 1219, and we do have a substitute for this one.
Move the substitute.
Second.
And as council is handing it out, I'll give you the quick backstory. I had 2 constituents who are affected by the timeline by which we allow individuals to amend their tax returns, particularly in the cases where they may be owed a refund. They're both named Ira, so I call this my Ira bill. And what we realized was that, there is a very small window of time by which Virginians who are working really hard to pay their taxes have to amend their tax returns in order to get a refund. However, there's a much larger window of time where the tax department, I can't think of the polite word to say, but they can go after you for taxes that you owe. And so, so the window of time to amend your tax returns is 3 years. The window of time for the tax department to go after you is, depending on whether or not you paid your taxes, is 6 or 7 years. So if you haven't paid your taxes at all, they have 6 years. If you've paid your taxes, the tax department, and you submitted a refund, they have within a 3-year window to do some assessments and then have, from the start date, 7 years to pursue funds that you may owe the state. And so I wanted to, both of my constituents realized that they had this situation outside of the 3-year window. One person was not able to fully claim their refund owed to them. They both were unable to fully claim their refund owed to them because they missed that 3-year window. Been thinking a lot about how our system is set up, you know, understandably so to benefit the state in terms of the timeline to pursue funds owed to the state. But it's harder for Virginia taxpayers, individuals, I'm not talking about corporations, to know and understand that timeline, to be able to amend their returns and get their refunds if owed any in a timely, you know, within that timeline. So this bill tries to kind of square that up a little bit more to make it even. We originally had proposed a 7-year window, which I found was outlandish. But due to the tax department's good study, they realized that other states fall within a 3 to 4 year window. There's, you know, 5 being really an outlier as well. And so my recommendation is to change the window by which individuals are able to amend their tax returns and seek a refund from 3 to 4 years. And then amend the timeline by which the tax department's able to pursue funds that are owed to the state from 7 to 6 years to make it even across the board. Because
And
it's
this
6
is-
year in some cases now. Okay, Ms.
And that's reflected in the substitute. I hear a motion on the substitute.
We accepted the substitute earlier.
Pardon?
You just move to accept the substitute.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Don, there is
Okay,
your
then, are there any questions of the patron?
No.
Are there anyone here to speak for the bill? Speak against the bill? Tax department, do you have any comments?
Madam Chair, Matt Lilly, Department of Taxation. We work closely with Delegate Tran to try to,
Can you speak a little bit louder for those of us who have old ears?
yes, sir. We work closely with Delegate Tran to try to make the bill do what she wanted to do, and make sure that if the statute of limitations was extended, the period we can assess was extended as well to 4 years. And I think the word Delegate Tran was looking for was the collections period. Once we've made an assessment and billed someone, we have currently 7 years to do a collections action to try to pursue, to try to get the money.
Okay, so essentially as presented then. Committee any other questions? Committee operates by motion.
Move to report with substitute.
Is there a second? The bill dies for lack of a second. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any, Delegate Kilgore?
Thank you. House Bill 1533, Madam Chairwoman.
That's under business development.
Right. And before we get started, I need a line amendment on line 12, strike 2022 and insert 2025. That would bring it in, make the sunset provision consistent with the Senate bill that's coming over here. So.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
All right, House Bill 1533 increases the annual cap for the motion picture production tax credit from 6.5 million to 13 million. However, the increased amount of $6.5 million is exclusively for productions that utilize areas of the state that are designated as economically distressed areas. So what we're looking at is motion pictures that use the cities, inner cities, or the rural areas of the state. So basically, it's an incentive to encourage film companies to look first to the distressed areas of the state. And you're looking at films that would have, in the past, that would have, I guess, in economically distressed areas like Loving in Charles City County, Dirty Dancing in Giles County, Captain Phillips in Norfolk, Evan Almighty in Summersby and Bath County. So this is a tool that we can use to entice these film productions. I mean, when we had Big Stone Gap out in I was amazed at the number of folks that were there spending money, in that little area of Virginia. So I think it is a great investment someone here from the film, Department of Film, I think. There's Andy, yeah. Okay. Come on up.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Andy Edmonds, Director of the Virginia Film Office. We're obviously part of Virginia Tourism Corporation as well. This additional $6.5 million would actually generate $65 million in annual economic impact. The fiscal cost would be about $4.5 million. So we feel it is a good investment in the way it targets rural and economically distressed areas. Is an intelligent way to do it. To really, we think the impact would be even more valuable in those areas. If I could just briefly point out that this industry, when I explained to my children that when I was their age, we only had 3 television channels to choose from, they look at me like I'm an alien, right?
Yeah.
And today we have so many different new streaming platforms, et cetera, that the demand for this content worldwide is growing exponentially. And the creation of this content is actually a manufacturing process. So these are actually content manufacturing jobs. It really shouldn't be called a motion picture tax credit. These are content manufacturing jobs that use carpenters, painters, seamstresses. It's like a moving construction project. And these are jobs that cannot be outsourced to automation as well. So it's a unique industry, great opportunity for the Commonwealth. We have 32 colleges and universities that have film and media programs. We want these kids, when they graduate from these programs, to not have to move to other states and have more aggressive incentives to induce this industry. So.
Delegate Byron, did you have a question?
Well, one of them was the revenue. I was gonna ask Delegate Kilgore, do you plan on debuting in one of these?
That's a revenue.
Yeah, right.
The other question was, how do we compare to other states as far as this incentive?
Well, I mean, of course, Georgia and Georgia just dwarfs everybody. They're killing it down there with their film tax credits, and Atlanta and that whole area is just bloomed and really does well. But we've been way behind in the past, and I think Andy can speak to that. We've been way behind, but Andy's done a great job in getting like The Walking Dead. We had the Homeland filmed here last year before last. So I mean, we've been doing pretty good, but.
Well, to give you the answer on that, currently our tax credit limit is $6.5 million. This will increase it to 13. So even that 13, we would still be less than half of North Carolina at 31. Kentucky has $100 million to induce this industry. Kentucky. Ohio 40, Pennsylvania 70, Louisiana 140. So even if this modest increase, we would still be less than half of North Carolina.
I'm a little concerned about time. We have other speakers speaking for. If you could
Madam Chair,
briefly.
Clark Lewis, Travis Sanders, represent AMC Networks. He mentioned Aliens. We filmed Zombies here for 94 days, the Walking Dead franchise. 94 days, we spent $45 million just for the scale of the size of production, predominantly in South Richmond, Hopewell, Petersburg, and other areas throughout the state. We very much support this legislation. Appreciate that they can bring
Thank
this.
you. Please identify yourself. Are there anyone else to speak for?
Madam Chair, my name is Laura Bateman, and I'm here representing the city of Richmond and also for Virginia First Cities, and they are very supportive of this legislation, and it's been a real shot in the arm to our economically distressed cities, and we ask you to support it.
Thank you. Anyone else speaking for? You can just.
Tyler Mick from the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, just echoing Clark's comments earlier and how these film crews help support local investments.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Terry Stroud. I'm with the Virginia Production Alliance, and the film industry in Virginia and the tourism industry in Virginia fully support this bill. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I know I have one before we move. My concern is the fiscal impact. I know that it's undersubscribed. So have you considered just carving out a portion of what we have to be directed towards in economically distressed areas?
Well, the current amount that we have, by virtue of the way it's set up, it can go to economically distressed areas, but this would set aside an additional money that's specifically only to be used for distressed areas.
I understand, but have you considered, since it's undersubscribed, then in the current revenue that you have, the current credits that you have, directing them more towards distressed areas, setting aside for distressed?
Well, the problem is that the $6.5 million that we have now is currently subscribed for work that is occurring right now through the next next couple of years. I mean, the amount, like I said, relative to North Carolina at 31 and Ohio at 40, it's just such a small amount that certainly the client, by virtue of the percentage, is induced to go to the distressed areas because they get an additional relative percentage. But if we took our current 6.5 and made it exclusively for distressed areas, we would probably have no work because it would totally tie their hands.
Are there other questions?
I had one. Delegate Kilgore, Senator Lucas is carrying the companion bill on the other side? Okay.
Are there other questions?
Move the report. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have a question? You said that was okay?
It was a budget amendment?
Yeah, I trust that you have a budget amendment. It was
We
not
we
one.
did, but we were told we didn't have to have, we do, but we were told we didn't have to have one, so.
Well, again, this is one where, it wasn't in, all of the compelling statements that have been made, it wasn't put in the budget as introduced, and that's the dilemma that we have, that if it is
We
this
did.
economic incentive, why wasn't it the film, agency able to get it into the budget as introduced?
That is correct, but Madam Chair, we did file a budget amendment.
Yeah, we did.
We did, okay.
Yes.
Right, that answers that question.
So what it, and.
We have a motion to report and
Report and refer.
Second.
All right, please open the roll, cast your vote on the board, to report and refer 1533.
Hold on. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I voted the right way. When I pressed the green, I saw a red come up, but that was someone
Is it
else.
correct?
Yeah.
All right, the HB 1533 reports and refers, recommend to report and refer by a vote of 6 to 2.
Thank you.
I know, that's why Don said it.
Delegate Ferris?
Let everybody know. I'll follow you.
Yes, ma'am. House Bill 1694.
Now, this is one where we have a 2-minute limit on it because of budget impact.
Okay. And again, I don't understand the budget impact, but let me tell you what the bill is supposed to do. And it says that once a taxpayer claims a tax credit, the taxpayer is deemed a vested interest in such credit. And my purpose in the bill was not to say that there was no subsequent act of the General Assembly that would change it, other than to say that once you were given these credits and the stipulations were provided they could be used for, that they couldn't go back and change. One situation in particular that I'm aware of, when the credits were given, they were told it could be used $25,000 per year per taxpayer, and then in the budget it was amended to only use $10,000 per year. And this tax credit was very important to some estate planning, and so the family members that received tax credits versus real property were not able to convert them to cash like they had planned.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the 2 minutes, appreciate that.
Madam Chair, I think I understand the circumstance you described, but the thing that strikes me is that number 2 says the provisions of this act shall be retroactive.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that was not what I intended. Mr. Delegate Ware, that was not what I had intended for it to say, and it's fine with me if this committee wants to change that. All I intend is going forward, the situation that I'm talking about is basically changing the rule of the game after you start. And I think it's very disingenuous of the state or anyone to give something in return for something, and then later say that those credits are not able able to use them.
Delegate Ware?
I appreciate the offer. Let me see how the rest of the flow goes, and if it's appropriate, I may move to take that out.
Are there any other questions? Anyone here to speak for? Against? My concerns are, again, how this is administered, given that the fiscal impact statement says that it's potentially significant impact, and that the budget language can always override whatever we do. And so this is where I find this bill to be an appropriate focus on not, as we say when we play euchre, not reneging, but in fact, I don't know how we get around this budget impact without appropriations taking that responsibility. They're the ones who sweep the table often and pull in a number of these unused credits.
Well, Madam Chair, there is a individual that's no longer with us here in the General Assembly who was famous for that, and this might have been intended for him.
The committee operates on motion. Bill, sits for lack. Bill sits for lack of a second. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ronnie, second.
I'm sorry, but the audio is just not coming across for folks if I look down and I don't see you, so, okay. Bill has been moved and seconded. Please open the roll. Cast your vote on the board. I'm still waiting for you.
There's 3, 4, there's 4, 4.
Bill fails to report.
Thank you.
The next patron, Delegate Jones, if we could wait till Delegate Sickles was here.
I have another bill.
Yes, if you do the emergency.
Can you do that one quickly?
The R&D.
Yes.
HB 748.
That's correct. I would draw the committee's attention, Madam Chair, to House Bill 748, which is the Research and Development Tax Credit, which this body established in 2016, 2011 and 2016. I would say that these tax credits are oversubscribed. The R&D tax credit has been highly successful. On the small credit, the cap is $7 million right now, and on the large cap, it's 20. This bill would increase the small cap to $7.7 million and the large cap to 22.
Do you have an amendment or a substitute?
We have a line amendment, actually.
Line amendments. Council will pass out the line amendments.
Move the line on.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The line amendments are adopted.
Can I
Yes.
just ask a question on this?
Yes, Delegate Ware has a question of tax.
And I don't know if you would know this, or maybe it would be taxed. Under the current arrangements being oversubscribed, is it first in line, or does it get prorated across those that apply?
Madam Chair, Doug, I believe it's prorated across. And I would also say that this bill extends the sunset on the tax credit to 2025.
Are there any other questions? Pardon? We did adopt the amendment. And yes, on this one, I have been in communications with appropriations, and with the cutback, they it's acceptable on their part to report and refer, they will look at it. Are there anyone else to speak for?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, David Skiles with Vector representing Raytheon. We have organized the R&D Coalition. Delegate Jones gave the highlights of this bill, but as he noted, in 2011, the General Assembly established the Small Business R&D Tax Credit, and in 2016 established the Major R&D Tax Credit. Both of those passed this body unanimously in 11 and 16, and it was really an opportunity for Virginia to take a lead when it comes to research and development. A number of our competitors in terms of states have very aggressive R&D tax credits. Many of those have no caps associated with them. We took a very conservative approach when these credits were established several years ago, and as Delegate Jones noted, both credits are heavily oversubscribed. I will note, Delegate Ware, it is a prorated process, so an application is due at a certain point during the year, and then tax begins to prorate that out based on the amount of applications received versus the cap, $20 million for the large credit and $7 million for the small credit. But happy to answer any additional questions folks may have regarding these credits.
Delegate Scott.
Just one quick question. This already is passed in the Senate, right?
Senator Howell has this in the Senate, and I believe that it's moving forward on that side as well.
Anybody else to speak for?
Madam Chair, Andrew Lamar on behalf of the Richmond Technology Council. Appreciate the patient bringing the bill. This will help Virginia be more competitive when talking about bringing technology-based jobs and investments back to Virginia.
Thank you.
Close by.
Tyler Minnick for the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. We're supportive of the bill. I believe that will incentivize continued investment in high tech and high tech industries.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Troy Murphy with the Northern Virginia Technology Council, representing about 1,000 member companies, 300,000 employees. We'll note that about half of our members have fewer than 10 employees and are small businesses. So both of these credits are extremely important to our membership.
Thank
and
you.
we are supportive.
Anyone else? Anyone to speak opposition? Any questions of the committee?
Move the report and refer.
Second.
It's been moved to report and refer to, as amended, to appropriations. Please open the roll. Cast your vote on the board. Okay, I'm sorry, it doesn't show up on mine, so. Okay, the, HB 748 is reported and referred as amendment to appropriations 9-0. Recommended, reported, but.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm gonna run to the other room and I'll come back for this.
All right, okay. Yes, Delegate Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I might, famous last words, I think 1580 should be quick, less than my allotted, what is it, 2 minutes are we doing? This really is an administrative, not an administration bill, but administrative bill. It simply updates the code. It's pointed out to me by a lawyer who does this kind of work at 58.1-810, which talks about taxations of recordation taxes. In paragraph 3 talks about a deed to which a husband and wife are the only parties, bringing the code into up to date in terms of modern times and what we recognize as married spouses these days. This simply would change husband and wife to the word spouses so that no clerk or lawyer gets stuck with a same-sex couple that can't get this recordation exemption because the language doesn't match. So it updates the code.
Move to recommend reporting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend reporting. All those in favor, please cast your vote on the board. HB 1580 is recommended to report 7-2.
Madam Chair. Can I ask you a question while we're still here?
Absolutely, I'm sorry, we're just.
Why can't they just use their names, is my
Well, the
question.
bill says husband and wife.
Is there-
Excuse me,
is
the
there a-
statute says husband and wife, so,
Yes.
technically, if two married men or two married women appear and want to avail themselves of this, they are not covered by this statute. So this simply makes it spouses.
Okay, I thought it was just a record of it, a deed.
No, this is an exemption to a recordation tax.
Okay.
Thank you. Do we have other patrons here? Yes, and again, it's 2
Delegate
minutes.
Watts, I also had 461.
I'm sorry,
That's-
go right ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. Members of the committee, there are some of us, frankly, a lot of us who think Virginia is sort of on the verge of a real revolution in terms of energy production. And what this bill would do is create an energy property tax credit to sort of help light the fuse for solar in Virginia. This is brazenly stolen from North Carolina, which did this several years ago, and it helped launch its solar industry in a way that Virginia is way behind. This would simply create a solar a tax credit for people who put in solar or other renewable energy equipment. It would be limited by each individual. They could not get more than $15,000 or 35% of the installed cost of the equipment. Statewide, it would be limited to $5 million, and the person getting the credit would have to take it in equal 5-year installments. So what it would do is, as I said, incentivize and help light the fuse for distributed renewable energy in Virginia, and give people an incentive to start that process. That's
Are
the
there any questions of the patron? Delegate Rowland.
You mentioned the North Carolina tax credit. Is that currently in place, or is that?
I think theirs has sunsetted.
Sunset. And how long was it in place?
I think theirs was in place, I'm guessing, I think it was 10 years, Delegate Ware. This sunsets in 5 years.
let me just say, one of the things that inspired this bill was frankly conversations with members in my neck of the woods in Northern Virginia, but more importantly down in Southwest and Southside Virginia, where we had people in the solar industry going to North Carolina to work because there was no solar industry to speak of in our own state. So this would help bring that solar industry across the border into our state.
Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And, Delegate Sullivan, I talked with some of my friends in the industry, including my neighbor, Cliff Bunn, who installed a geothermal unit at Patsy's at my home. And just a couple of questions. Again, I think it's great we want to incentivize renewable energy. We also want to, obviously, this is a jobs program, creates but one thing that caused me a little bit concerned, and I talked to my friends about that, was two things really. The 35% tax credit, which, when it's coupled with any federal tax credit, it usually means that the taxpayer's got more skin in the game, than the person who purchases the system. But the other thing was, if we really want to create more jobs and more units being installed, it seemed to me that we would want to reduce that 35% tax credit down so you could have, so I believe this only allowed for about 1,000, at least in our case, 1,000 like geothermal units being installed in statewide. Is that correct? And so
Madam Chair, I haven't done that particular math, but yes, geothermal is included in the list, as is CHP.
They run about 25K.
Believe me, I never wrote the check for one time.
How's it working?
It's working great.
There you go.
But I mean, but if we lowered the individual tax credit rate, that we would have more units installed. So
or we could increase the
cap. Absolutely, sir.
Which would be my preference, though. You get no argument from me on those issues. This was an attempt to just get us started. I'd love to create numbers that allow even more, but I was trying to read the tea leaves as to what might be possible.
Madam Chair.
Yes, we'll go through this one. Yes, Delegate Ayala.
There is a budget amendment.
Yes, it does.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, needs a budget amendment. It's a $5 million biennial debt.
So move to report and refer to appropriations.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend reporting and referring to appropriations. Is there discussion? Please open the roll. I think I can still vote. I'm not sure.
You can. Just Corey does.
I close the roll. The bill fails to recommend report and refer.
Thank you.
Who's next in queue? Delegate Cole, and before we start with Delegate Cole's, the other Delegate Cole, which is kind of confusing, has a similar measure, and he texted me a little while ago asking if his bill, House Bill 243, could be rolled into your House Bill 80. You have House Bill 80, right? Delegate Cole?
Yes.
Yeah. Would that be okay to you?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so we'll incorporate a coal bill into a coal bill. House Bill 243 into House Bill 80. So move. Second. Without objection, House Bill 243 is incorporated into House Bill 80.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and what my bill is very simple. All it would do, I know the General Assembly is wanted to give tax breaks to disabled veterans, but in the past they've done it through mandates on local government to provide tax breaks through the real estate tax, and they're about to do the same thing with the personal property tax. This would allow us, the General Assembly, to step up and provide the tax break with our own money by providing an income tax deduction for a 100% service-connected disabled veteran. And That's the bill. It's very simple and straightforward.
All right, thank you, Delegate Cole. Are there any, questions from the subcommittee? House Bill 8. Any questions, if not, any members of the public wishing to speak in favor of, sorry, Delegate Ayala had a
Sorry.
question.
I saw, sorry about this, we had some National Guard bills that came through. How did this bill differ from the National Guard bills that were?
I'm not familiar with the National Guard bill.
Okay.
This would, it doesn't matter what service you were in. If you're a veteran with 100% service-connected disability, you would qualify.
Delegate Watts.
As I re-looked at the Helmer bill that's already been passed, in fact, it did include both guard and military service, and it's already been passed and is up to appropriations, so that this bill covers it. I believe they're essentially the same impact.
Like I said, I'm not familiar with the other bill. I don't know what it does.
All right, let's get back to the members of the public. Anybody in support of House Bill 8? Anybody in opposition to House Bill 8? All right, back to the subcommittee. Do we have a motion?
Move to report and refer, I guess.
That was a substitute motion.
Substitute motion.
Motion to gently lay this on the table. I think Helmer's bill 125, and it's already passed in the Senate, 456. Those two bills have already come out. So I think this is just
The gentleman was, the motion, they were speaking to the motion. Is there a second to that substitute motion?
Second.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Sure.
It was
Speaking to the-
Jason Miyare's bill 125, and that was for low-income military veterans. So he was even more tailored, I would say, along the same lines of what you're.
So there was a motion properly seconded to lay the bill gently on the table. Clerk will open the roll. Close the roll. The motion is to lay it on the table successfully at 7-3 votes. Thank you, Delegate Cole. And we have a few or just going in order? Delegate LaRock, is he here? Oh, there he is. Delegate LaRock, and then afterwards, if Delegate Airy is here?
Yes.
Okay. Delegate LaRock, you have House Bill 631.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is a bill similar to one that was heard last week, and what I'd like to do is add some points to the presentations that were heard. Hopefully, by doing so, encourage the committee to.
I'm sorry, Delegate. Delegate LaRock, just pause 1 minute for a second to give the clerk a chance to post the bill. Are we looking at House Bill 631 or 766?
766.
Okay, let's go back to House Bill, I think I called you for 631, but that's okay. House Bill, there we go. House Bill 766 is up. Delegate LaRock.
So first we propose a substitute that has the effect of just shifting this to be enacted through a section of code other than what was originally identified. And I do have a couple of line amendments in our second.
Yeah. So first of all, let's have the substitute handed out.
So again, all the wording is identical to the original.
Does everybody have the substitute and do you have it properly before us?
Move the substitute.
Second, okay. Without objection, the substitute is before us, adopted. Delegate LaRock, did you want to make line amendments now or do you want to speak to this substitute first?
Probably now.
Okay.
And then I can explain it as amended. Please, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Delegate LaRock, do you have line amendments to the council? Are you going to?
They have been drafted, so we can
Okay.
hand them out if you would. Fairly small changes that interaction with different.
So we have 3 line amendments to the substitute we just adopted, so I need a motion to adopt the line amendments. Second. Okay, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, good. The line amendments are accepted to the substitute. Delegate LaRock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first line amendment would change the original or the substituted proposal in a way that would extend a tax credit to not just volunteers, but volunteers who have served 2 years. And by doing so, encourage people to not just move in and move out, be trained, but to stay with it and become full-time career volunteers, become permanent volunteers. The second line item, the line amendment, is to, and the third actually, is to just clarify the meaning of volunteer. There's a couple categories. I think there was some disagreement as to whether or not those could include some paid staff, so that those are just clarifying so that we're dealing with strictly volunteers. So I would say that I am not a big fan of tax preferences complicating the code, and that's a sentiment shared by the board. So the question is this a compelling situation? We heard testimony. I wasn't able to bring in the same witness, but I think it was a JLR study some time ago that brought forward the dire need to increase volunteerism because it was on the decline. There was different recommendations made. They were implemented, and volunteerism is still on the decline. I think probably the couple strongest points that may not be obvious, we generally, I'm sure, all understand the service that volunteers provide and the nature of the voluntary service. But in contrasting rural areas to less rural, more suburban areas, usually in these rural areas, the primary response, the body of responders, the membership of a volunteer fire department is often exclusively volunteer. So that means when there's not enough volunteers, either fewer people do more work, which is very often the case. I know that from talking to volunteers in the communities I serve. Or response to people, the stations are understaffed and response time is longer. That's where it becomes a life and death situation, perhaps, for some.
Okay, so, Laura, I think we've heard a similar measure last week, and so let me see if there are any other questions from the subcommittee.
May I make the second point that I'd like to make,
sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Just before I did that, I want.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
and he may not have heard before, is this a budget bill?
Yeah.
It's 2-minute time limit for all budget bills today because of the amount of our docket, so you might wanna make your point more expeditiously.
Yeah. Delegate Lindsay, appreciate that, and again, let me first apologize. I had to be out of the meeting for most of the morning with other conflicts. Delegate Watts, while she was presiding, had announced that for budget bills, which are about 8 or 9 of them, that she had asked that we limit the debate on all sides to about 2 minutes per budget bill. Now, I wasn't here, so I'm sorry that I didn't emphasize it again, but to the extent, obviously we'll give it the time, but to the extent that the rest of you who are in the room, budget bills are supposed to have a 2-minute limit is based on what the previous chair had announced at the beginning of this meeting. So, back to Delegate Laura.
So the point I made is fewer volunteers in rural areas means longer response time and diminished service. The effect this has on more urban areas is that volunteers back up the full-time paid firefighters. And that's why this is supported by the people that head those organizations. I wish I had a letter. We were working on that, didn't show up in time. But likewise, in more urban areas, when there aren't enough volunteers, there are two choices. They have to either incur longer waits, inferior service or less degree of service, or they have to bring in more staff, which is very, very costly. And hopefully you'll accept the proposition that this is a cost that would more than offset the benefit of this will more than offset the cost by not requiring those service providers in more urban areas to hire the personnel. And that's, thank you for the additional time, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, no, thank you, Delegate Laurent, and I apologize for the lack of announcement earlier in the process. Any questions from the subcommittee? Any members of the public wishing to speak in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I'll stay well under 2 minutes. I'm Ed Rhodes. I'm with the Virginia Association of Volunteer Rescue Squadron, and we strongly support this bill. We think it's a good recruitment and retention piece of legislation for our members that are on the borderline whether they want to stay or leave. Thank you.
Anybody else in favor? If not, anybody in opposition to this measure? Now, back to the subcommittee. Any questions from the subcommittee? Any motions? Hearing.
Second.
Motion to report this bill. Properly seconded.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Motion.
Delegate Ayala.
Mr. Chairman, substitute motion? I think this has, if I recall, a budget impact, is that correct?
Yeah, the point of order is there a budget impact? Yes, there is a budget impact. I don't have it in front of me.
I'm sorry, point of order.
Yeah. Doug Ayala, did you seek a motion or did you seek a question? I just want to clarify.
Well, would this then not go to approps because it does have a budget impact?
Doug Ayala, just to,
I'm sorry,
no,
question.
to answer the question, anything that is in this block of budget impacts are bills that would, if there was a positive report motion, that they would need to be referred. And also add to that the fact that, I believe the chairman might announce it, but, the Appropriations Committee has not indicated one way or another about what to do, but we, as a matter of practice, these bills, we're just gonna send up there, just because, it does have a budget impact. Okay, we're back to the motion. Was there a substitute motion?
Yes.
You had made a
I'm
substitute
sorry.
motion to
Gently lay
lay on the table?
Gently, very gently.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
There was a motion and a second.
There was a second to the substitute, so now we're back to the motion that's in front of us, which is lay on the table. Any further discussions? I'm sorry, it's now,
This is a priority motion.
Yeah, so, the motion is properly before us to lay the bill on the table. Corporal open the bill. The clerk will close the roll. The motion is laid on the table 5-4. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Delegate Leroy, you have another bill, right?
Not that I'm prepared to present, so I'll go back to my office and the bill number is
631. Is that
Okay, thank
considered to be a budget block?
It's Monday. Thank you.
It is.
It is. So, yeah. We'll come back. Okay, the next in line was Delegate Aird.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. House Bill 1318. And I do have a substitute if I can have that reported, and I'd ask the committee to adopt that.
Substitute. Council will hand out the substitute. While the council is presenting the substitute, could you just tell us quickly what the difference is between the substitute and the original bill?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The substitute merely adds in the sales tax exemption. The legislation, the original bill only had the tax credit, and both the tax and sales exemption are included in the governor's budget. So we're just trying to make that mirror what's actually intended. Okay, let me know.
Do we have, the substitute? Yes. Delegate Ayala,
Before
question.
we accept this,
Sure.
I'll move to accept the substitute, then I'll ask my question.
Sure, there's a motion to accept the substitute, seconded. All in favor say aye.
Would you like me to
Any
present
opposed?
for?
The substitute is accepted. Delegate Ayala had a question.
She mentioned it's an administrative bill, I believe. Is it?
I believe under the Virginia tourism,
Yes.
as well as.
Administration.
Administrative.
You mean the governor's bill, that's what you meant.
There you go. One more cup of coffee, I just
Oh,
want
no,
to
it's
bring
okay.
it to your attention. Thank you, sorry about that.
So, let's try to keep a little bit of order here. We have a substitute in front of us. The delegate has described the substitute. Any questions to the delegate, the patron?
Yeah.
Delegate Ware?
We just had Delegate Kilgore with a very similar bill. Do you know the differences between
I'm
those, or
unaware,
what,
I'm
maybe the one of the,
Oh, hi. Andy Edmonds, Director of Virginia Film Office, Vice President of Virginia Tourism. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members. This bill simply extends the sunset. Delegate Kilgore had an increase in the actual tax credit and had some language about the sunset that was similar to a Senate bill that's going forward. What the primary purpose of Delegate Aird's bill and why it's been a discussion in these other bills is that we try to seek out episodic content for year after year work, and without an extension of the sunset, our clients cannot plan long-term planning. Therefore, this bill was essential to help us stay in the game with episodic content. That's why Delegate Aird kindly put forward this bill, and there may be other provisions in other bills that are addressing that sunset issue.
Sure. Further question from Delegate Ware?
Mr. Wood, did not,
I'm sorry.
Edmonds.
I'm sorry, Edmonds. Didn't the Kilgore bill also extend the sunset to 2025, if I'm remembering correctly?
That's correct, it does. It does, in that bill, it does have an extension to 2025. Delegate Ayers' bill is 2027, I believe it's a 5-year extension, that's right.
Any further questions from the subcommittee to the patron? If not, Delegate
Question,
Fowler.
and perhaps my ears are not working correctly, but did you also say this also includes an exemption for sales tax? Which I think is different from the other bills?
They oh well, I don't know what the other bill had in it, so I won't speak to that.
Okay, Delegate Fowler, any further questions?
That's the only one I
Delegate
got.
Byron.
Another question add on to that
Sure.
question had to do with, Delegate Kilgore's bill dealt with, distressed areas.
I can't
Is
speak
this
to
just
his
a
bill at
general?
all.
Sure. So, Delegate Byron, why don't we ask the members of the public if they can address both of those questions, because I believe that Delegate Aaron is limited to her bill, and, Mr. Edmonds happens to, know this area very well, so.
Can we
wait.
just give the patron an opportunity to present her bill, and then maybe some of our questions could be answered?
I thought she already did. Delegate Aaron already presented the bill, I think.
No, she presented the substitute.
Which is the bill? It's in front of us. Substitute is.
At the leisure of the committee.
Yeah, so I think to be helpful to the patron, I think it would be good if we had Mr. Edmonds explain to us both the nature of this bill as well as the other questions that came up about other bills, because the goal here is, to the extent they're consistent, we'd like to keep all the bills together in one place, and so if we could hear from Mr. Edmonds, that will, I think, clarify where we are.
Yes, sir, absolutely. In the governor's budget, it makes reference to an extension of the sunset for the tax credit program, as well as the sales tax exemption program, which basically, the sales tax exemption is common in this industry where a vendor is not basically taxed twice for items that they use to manufacture what you see on the screen. So there's a sales tax exemption that goes along with this industry related to those goods and services, so they're not taxed twice on those goods. So that's the sales tax exemption thing. It's been in the program for like 11 or 12 years. This is just to extend the sunset on that. And Delegate Ayers' bill primarily is to extend this sunset as far as we possibly can. In many states, there's no sunset, therefore they have a lot of episodic content that comes because they may go for 5, 6, 7 years of content manufacturing in their state because there is no sunset. And of course, you have the power, you want to change the sunset at any time, but just from a marketing perspective, to have that no sunset clause in your marketing materials is quite valuable. So what this bill asks for is a 5-year extension of the sunset, which is from 2022 to 2027, which would be valuable to us in our marketing efforts. Currently, we have projects that are in the queue that currently they would not be able to extend their work here without the extension of the sunset. So that's primarily what the bill does. There are a couple of other technicalities in the bill of changing the authority that signs the tax credit, because our office is actually part of tourism anyway, so that's why that language is in there.
Good.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Delegate Byron.
The bills aren't in conflict, so they could actually both
That's
go
right.
forward, right?
That's right. That's the point that we're trying to make here. So, anybody else in the audience wishing to speak in favor of this measure? Yes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Terry Stroud from the Virginia Production Alliance. We fully support this, and in both of them, both of these, the credit and the sales tax have been used for quite a period of time. The exemption, the sales tax has been in existence since 1995. It also fits with the day-to-day of the industry as far as non-series work and the day-to-day. So we fully support this.
Okay. Is there anybody else in favor? Anybody opposition to this measure? If not, we're back to the subcommittee, and as Delegate Byron mentioned, and as some of you alluded to, if there is a proper motion here to report and to refer this measure so that this and similar measures will be in appropriation.
Second.
Second. With the substitute. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We accepted the substitute. Okay. There was no more line amendments, right? Okay. Now we're back to the board. The clerk will open the board. Move to report and to refer.
Mr. Chairman, and I
Yes.
just, if I could.
Wait, let me just close it. The clerk will close the roll. The measure reports and refers on a vote of 8 to 1. Delegate Ware.
And just to note, I had also voted no on the Kilgore. In the interest of.
I thank the committee.
Thank you, Delegate Aaron. And, okay, now we're back to the, is Delegate Sickles here? Oh, there he is. And, Delegate Joey's also here as well.
Can we do my easy bill first?
So we have Delegate Sickles, you have 2 measures. 3 measures?
Well.
All right, so why don't we start with Delegate Sickles, if it's okay, would you be willing to do 129 first?
129 first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The other two are related to another bill, so,
Right,
thank you.
right. So, this bill 129 is a request from the State Corporation Commission. Sam Nixon is here with me to explain it. It affects the maximum possible assessment you can assess on utilities that are regulating them. You might recall that the SDC is almost, or essentially 100% funded, non-general fund agency. And I have 1.5 pages of text on why we need this flexibility. It's a really technical bill. I don't think there's opposition to it from the regulated utilities, although we may be surprised here, I don't know. But I would let Sam, unless you want me to try to explain it, I'll let Sam do it, maybe to save time.
Sure.
Okay.
Delegate Nixon.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate Delegate Sickles introducing this bill for us. Very simply, what this does is it raises the current statutory maximum rate that the SEC can impose on certain regulatory entities. This code section mostly, but not exclusively, concerns public service companies. So electric, gas, water, there's some others. So basically, the main thing I think you want to know is today, under the code, the maximum rate is 20/100 of 1%. This bill seeks to raise it to 26/100 of 1%. So it's I feel like it's a pretty modest tax. I'm a low tax guy, but it's a pretty modest thing. So we're at the current maximum today, and we project in a couple of years that we will no longer have the funds sufficient to pay our attorneys and our engineers and our accountants. So we need this flexibility so that in the future, as our expenses continue to move in line mostly with inflation, that we can meet our obligations.
Any questions to either the patron or to the representative from the State Corporation Commission from the subcommittee? Delegate Byron.
Is this projecting the additional, people that you expect to have to hire, is that what you said? How many FTEs you talking about?
Our current projections, Delegate Byron, are our current run rate. For example, when statutory we're required in the budget to increase the compensation of our people, that comes out of non-general funds. Insurance cost increases to technology. Our head count has been pretty steady over the last 10 years. It's gone up maybe 5 or 10%. So hopefully that helps answer your question. We don't anticipate any significant uptick in the number of people that we have on staff today.
Any further questions to either gentleman in front of us? Any members of the public wishing to be heard on this measure on either side? If not, we'll be back to the subcommittee.
Move to report.
Second. The motion is properly to report, seconded. We'll on the board.
This is the lowest tax increase you'll ever vote for, ever in your history.
Yeah.
What was that?
It's not even a tax,
It's not even on the radar screen.
It was like
Might have.
0.26.
The clerk will.
He's a fiscal conservative, would not do
Clerk will
anything.
close the roll on this fine bill, which reports on a 7-2 vote. Thank you, Delegate Nixon. Delegate Sickles, you have two other measures, and we're going to try to do this a little bit different. Folks in the audience, I know that many of you are here to speak in this bill. We have two bills, one dealing, two by Delegate Sickles, House Bill 891, House Bill 892. And then there's a bill by Delegate Jones, House Bill 1539. And this is an unusual procedural process that we normally don't do because we always take up a bill one at a time. But as you heard a little while ago from the conversation about the motion picture tax credit, sometimes we have two bills that are similar enough that people feel that if one were to pass, what impact does it have on the other bill if they were both to pass? Do they become inconsistent? Do they contrast? And so this is a situation where my understanding is that Delegate Sickles' and Delegate Jones's bills would be kind of contradictory to each other. So if we were to take measure on it, it would be very difficult for us to pass both sides. So in that spirit of trying to educate ourselves and the members of the public, what I asked is that Delegate Sickles, if you could present the bill, what the problem is, what you're trying to solve, and then we turn to Delegate Jones, and then we'll see where the subcommittee and the members of the public are. Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I would have a substitute here for 891, the broader bill, that I don't know if it's been passed out or
Not
if it
yet.
has a substitute.
So the clerk will pass out the substitute to 891, and to put this in proper posture, again, motion?
Motion.
Second.
If,
So
if you've been.
the motion is to accept the nature of a substitute to 891. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Not that. Yeah, 31-page amendment to the nature of a substitute is before us on House Bill 891.
Okay, the bill provides parity for all the car rental industry. It modernizes Virginia's insurance, registration, and tax laws to ensure that peer-to-peer vehicle rental industry operates in Virginia in a manner that safeguards Virginians. Currently, peer-to-peer rental car companies operate in Virginia in an unregulated, untaxed environment. Peer-to-peer shared vehicles are vehicles owned by individuals that are offered for a daily rental rate via a Uber-type platform, and they're operated through websites or online applications. My bill defines a mechanism for the Department of Taxation to collect and distribute the 10% motor vehicle rental tax that is owed today. It's not a new tax. What we're doing in this bill is collecting tax that is owed today but not being paid. In doing this, my bill preserves important funds that flow to transportation, localities, and the general fund. That's why BML and VACO are here to support the bill. There is no fiscal impact. In fact, my bill preserves the revenue from these taxes with a positive impact to state and local revenues. The motor vehicle rental tax returns 40% of the revenue collected for transportation needs, 40% to localities for important local needs, and 20% to the general fund for the state police radio system. The other bill seeks to get a lower tax rate of 6% for peer-to-peer rentals. Their desire for a lower tax rate and a competitive advantage comes with a fiscal impact to the Commonwealth of over $500,000. So, if you choose to do that, please send it up to the Appropriations Committee so we can help pay for that, for the Department of Taxation to build a whole new tax system to collect this new tax while also producing less revenue at the same time. To be clear, this is,
I'm trying to like.
He's taking shots, and I heard the shot. He shot at least 3 times.
It's straightforward. We agree on various aspects to include insurance, airports, and regulatory scheme. The difference boils down to the peer-to-peer car rental industry owing a 10% tax under current law that they have not been paying, while also seeking to codify a much lower tax rate. You might have heard this is an enterprise bill. It is not. It's supported by the American Car Rental Association, the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, the Virginians for High-Speed Rail, Virginia Transit Association, the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance, the VACO, VML, counties of Arlington, Fairfax, and Hertz, one of Enterprise's biggest competitors. So, leave you with this that is written in the DP Department of Planning and Budget's fiscal impact statement, quote, under current law, peer-to-peer vehicle sharing transactions are subject to the motor vehicle rental tax, the same 10% total rate of other motor vehicles offered for rent in the Commonwealth. So this bill creates a modern way to collect the tax that's already owed.
All right, thank you, Delegate Sickles. Why don't we have your peer, Delegate Jones, present his bill, and then we'll open up to the questions for the subcommittee with both gentlemen saying your peer-to-peer.
Thank you, Delegate Dean. I have a substitute for 1539.
Yeah, sure, yeah. House Bill 1539.
They're coming from two different
Substitute.
perspectives.
Okay. So it was like a court case. Okay.
Move the substitute.
Second. The House Bill 1539 substitute has been probably made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
This is like people's
Yeah,
court.
the 15-page substitute is not before us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and I applaud Delegate Sickles for his interest in this millennial sort of theme issue. As one of the resident millennials in the House of Delegates, I took it upon myself to insert my views into this P2P legal framework, given the tendency of some of my peers to engage in behavior of this sort with these cars.
Maybe members like to pay our own way.
My bill 1539 establishes a legal framework for the peer-to-peer sharing, including record keeping and consumer protections. It establishes clear insurance provisions to protect the shared vehicle owner and the shared vehicle driver, and provides primary coverage in the event of an accident, among other things, uninsured motorist coverage, bodily injury, and property damage. It allows the insurer to exclude coverage on the vehicle's owner's policy when the vehicle is being utilized on the peer-to-peer platform. As Delegate Sickles said, the Commonwealth is currently not collecting taxes on most of these vehicles This bill provides a lower tax rate of 6%. 4% goes to the transportation fund, the same percentage to the transportation fund as the rental tax, and 2% goes to the locality. The 6% tax is lower than the 10% rental tax to offset all the taxes and fees collected on personal vehicles that rental taxes are not subject to. So there's a difference here in terms of what we're talking about, what we're assessing, and who's having to pay money. There are some figures that I could sort of show you. Came with a nice chart. You guys can all see this. You can see who's collecting and where the money goes and who's not paying money as we're trying to sort of solve this problem.
Delegate, do you want to?
I can circulate that.
Yeah,
you
might
might want to pass that around. And while you guys are looking at that, I would also note that this bill includes language that satisfies the airport, so it allows for legal operation of P2P at airports. I know we went through that with Uber and Lyft a couple years ago. This bill is also the result of a year-long stakeholder process at DMV. I'll note that DMV put forward a 6% tax rate in its draft, but that number was rejected by Enterprise. I know Delegate Sickles says his wasn't an Enterprise bill, but I think we're trying to be enterprising nonetheless here with what we're trying to do. So there was no consensus draft, and so we got various folks who were supportive of House Bill 1539. I would note there is a fiscal impact, but any cost to the Department of Tax will be recovered from the revenues of the tax, and the Department of Tax is considering providing for peer-to-peer on the same forms as the rental tax, which would cut the fiscal impact significantly. I don't know if tax is here, but I'm sure they can talk about this.
So, Delegate Jones, is there any okay, so let me ask a couple questions, make sure we're on the same page here. First of all, these both bills address an emerging issue in the Commonwealth as it is around the country. There are many aspects of allowing for peer-to-peer operations of vehicles. One of those issues is insurance. My understanding is that even though the bill deals with insurance, for our purposes in this committee here, on the Finance Committee, we're only looking at the tax implications and the regulations around the taxing. So there are other issues relevant to where they operate and insurance and such. To the extent that our focus has to be on the tax and financial implications, can you just succinctly tell us what would be the difference there on your measure and Delegate Sickles? And I'd like to say for Delegate Sickles as well.
Lower taxes, fiscal restraint, accountability, fairness.
Percentage-wise, what does that mean?
6%.
Okay, and Delegate Sickles, on your measure, just on that point, what would be the amount?
The amount?
The taxes that your bill would seek for this operation.
Oh, geez, I'm not, let me have to
Oh,
look.
should we
But
ask?
No.
I think we help
I
them out.
think 10%.
10%, okay.
Yeah, it's that 10% is the tax rate, yeah, but it flows to all kinds of good, public purposes, including,
So at this
transportation.
stage, given that we've kind of set the parameters here, if the two delegates wouldn't mind standing there, and we'll just ask the subcommittee for questions, and then we'll turn to the public. Let me start with Delegate Scott.
Quick question. So the current industry, the rental car industry now, do they pay 6% or 6%?
10%.
They pay 10% now? Okay. So why do we wanna make it lower for the new folks?
Because we as millennials have less money and it's a little bit more difficult.
Delegate Ayala, question.
Okay, so on here, I'm looking at this personal and rental. Is this showing us what your projections would be and what his are currently? Is that how I'm reading this? What delegate? Oh,
I think we're mixing
Well,
apples and oranges there.
If the delegates would like to defer to members of the public, we can do that as well. But there will be time for the public to speak directly as well. So a quick question to
that's what I'm asking.
an expert from Delegate Jones.
Okay. I was, did you wanna
Sure.
ask a question?
Delegate Ayala.
Okay, I was just asking, so as I'm reading this chart, is this what is currently collected by the enterprise and what will you be collecting for the peer-to-peer bill?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Ayala and Nicole Brenner with Reedsman, on behalf of General Motors and Haven. The personal vehicles are taxes that personal vehicles pay on their vehicle.
That's perfect.
And the comparison is what rental vehicles pay on their vehicles. So,
So when they purchase a car, they don't pay any taxes on it?
I won't speak on behalf of them, but yes.
Well,
Tommy may wanna answer that question or someone else on behalf of Enterprise, but that is a comparison based on the vehicle. That's why the tax rates are proposed at a different rate in Delegate Jones's bill to offset that.
Delegate Ayala.
I don't understand because I pay taxes when I buy my car, right? And I would think that anybody purchasing cars in the state of Virginia would pay the current Virginia tax. So how do they not pay that? tax?
Well, let's, one at a time.
Chairman Clark Lewis, member of the Committee for Enterprise Profit Center. So, as a commercial vehicle, we pay the motor vehicle rental car tax of 10%. A person pays the rental car tax as a private entity, private person.
Right.
They
Okay,
also
okay.
share in the car tax relief for that private purchase of taxes that Enterprise does not share. So they may pay a tax as a private when they buy a car, but they get tax relief from the Commonwealth. Enterprise, when they paid a 10% tax as a commercial entity, does not get car tax relief. And so, in their definition, they want to use personal and commercial vehicles to enjoy paying that lower rate, whereas now it's just the private vehicles. So, and also, the person who pays the 10% motor vehicle rental car tax is the person renting the car, not the owner of the car. So the owner of the car is the one that pays the sales tax. The renter of the car is what pays the 10%.
Oh.
It's different people and a different transaction.
Got it.
We're not
Delegate.
doing
I'm on
apples
it.
to apples here.
Delegate Ayala, any further questions?
And maybe both the delegates can tell me what the fiscal impact would be if your or the local impact to localities if your bill passed versus if your bill passed. Do you have that? I mean, that might be
Yeah,
like,
Delegate
how does this
Jones,
impact the
Delegate
localities?
Sickles.
fiscally?
Well,
I defer.
Well, currently, if you rent a car, and I mentioned how it's broken up, your locality receives money for it, for the car rental tax. It's a very important source of income. As this industry grows and doesn't pay the same, or the renter doesn't pay the same tax, the local government is at risk for losing that money that's the source of their functioning government basic services now. So as it grows, it's gonna take more and more from local government and the state.
Delegate Ayala, I would say that on my bill, I think 2% of the tax goes to locality.
Now, Delegate Campbell.
A question in response to something we were just told. Even my treasurer is ripping us off in the county or something else, but every year when I get my statement on my vehicles, I have to check off whether or not those vehicles are used for work.
That's right.
And that changes the tax structure.
That's right.
That's right.
So these vehicles are being used for work, they have to pay local taxes. And the state.
And Delegate Campbell
Delegate
and Mr. Chairman, and perhaps we glossed over this, but would it be helpful for us to explain what exactly this platform is? Or is everyone clear as to what the peer-to-peer?
Delegate Jones, that might be helpful because I think when we start talking about rental cars, especially brand names that we're familiar with, I think people are starting to think that this is about rental car insurance. These bills are dealing with a new product that is not rental car, and it's not your personal car that you use for your own purposes. You want to explain that?
Yeah, so Delegate Kima, as I understand peer-to-peer, and I think it's become popular amongst folks in urban areas, you can sort of loan out your car, much like an Airbnb sort of situation, which if I leave my car at the airport and I'm gone for 2 weeks, I will allow somebody based on the platform to use my car while I'm gone and then come back. So certainly it's not something that we could have contemplated a couple of years ago, but here we are in this gig economy, and I think what we're all trying to do is to seek to find a way for our localities and for private interests to get their fair share. And so I think we're obviously competing proposals, but certainly believe that the localities are entitled to some of the transportation fund. At the 6% level comes to mind. And again, the DMV working group really did come in at that 6% level with a lot of stakeholders involved.
And delegates, and the members of the public, just to make sure that we're, again, 100% on the same page here. We are not talking about rental cars in the traditional mode of you going to a rental place and renting a car that you rent.
I'm renting out my personal car.
Yeah, we're also not talking about peer-to-peer as in Uber and Lyft and other companies where you hire somebody to come and give you a ride. They may be using their private cars and you're using one of the seats in there, but that's not what we're talking about either. And we're also not talking about using your car to give people rides yourself. You're talking about letting your car that you own be used by somebody else for a very short purpose so that they can use that as a
Airbnb for cars. We get
That's right.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're talking about.
I'm just not giving out my
And the
car.
the important point here is that this may or may not be happening in Virginia right now, but there are no rules that regulate how that is being done. That's what we're trying to create for the tax purpose, not the insurance, none of the other things, just for the tax purpose.
Can I say this?
Delegate
This
Sickles.
is about renting cars. It's not about anything else. Everything is renting cars. Theirs is renting cars. Ours is renting cars. That's why they should pay the same tax. It's not not renting cars. One of them just, it's your personal car. They give you the key, you take it and come back. It's a car rental. The other one, you go to, you know, the Hertz desk and pick it up. They're both renting cars.
But,
Delegate Ware.
but the relevant difference here is we're talking all this tax stuff. Those that are in the circumstance of a peer-to-peer, personal cars are paying over $2,000 a year on average in taxes that rental cars are exempt from. And of that, annually, it's $1,000 roughly a year. So to say that we've got 10% and 6% does not take into account the taxes that you and I and all of us pay for our personal cars that we're going to use for
Sure.
peer-to-peer.
And let's also be mindful of the time here. Delegate Ayala.
We're talking about the rider paying the tax. You're mixing up the rider paying a tax on a parity basis with what they may or may not get paying their personal property tax to local government. That's a total different source. This tax, the 10% tax that they owe now, according to the tax department, goes 40% to transportation, 40% to localities for their needs, and 20% to the general fund. It's a whole different thing. So you're mixing in personal property taxes and with something that they owe today for renting a car.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Ware.
Since there's been a response, do rental cars pay a personal property
They
tax?
have other taxes that they pay that is not the same thing. They don't pay it when they buy the fleet. But what is it? What do you pay? Yeah.
Tommy Gerber with Enterprise Holdings. So the people that have been part of this, I'm here today because we're dealing with this all across the country, and we participated heavily. I was here all summer long in the DMV-led working group, and it was a wonderful process. Where the confusion comes is that the activity that's going on here is two really separate transactions. Vehicle owners have their personal cars. When they buy their personal car at retail, they owe sales tax on that transaction. Those vehicle owners are transacting with a peer-to-peer company and letting the peer-to-peer company take that car and make it available to the public for rent. The peer-to-peer company is not paying tax when they source that car from a private individual, because the peer-to-peer company is going to only acquire that vehicle for the purpose of resale. In the Commonwealth, when you acquire an asset solely for the purpose of resale, that asset is tax exempt. So, peer-to-peer platform gets the car from the owner, who's paid taxes on it, in a tax exempt transaction. The peer-to-peer company makes that car available to a consumer for rent. What Delegate Sickles' bill is trying to do is ensure that when a consumer rents a car from either a peer-to-peer company or a rental company, they have tax parity. They have the same experience. They pay the same tax. Now, what is different, and you're absolutely right, when a rental car company, whether it's Hertz, whether it's Avis, whether it's a mom and pop rental car operator, when they buy a car exclusively for the purpose of resale, it is tax exempt. Just like a grocer that buys paper towels to resell it in their store, that's tax exempt. However, if we buy a car that's gonna be driven by an employee, if we buy a car that's gonna be used to shuttle our customers around, that is not tax exempt because that vehicle is not bought solely for resale.
Mr. Chairman.
So you're talking about like fleet?
Wait a minute.
Hold on. Ma'am, do you have anything further to add?
I would love to add a lot, but that just answers the question.
So
for
just
now.
pause for now. Let's start with Delegate Ayala and then Delegate Scott afterwards.
What she said made me ask a question. Whatever the peer-to-peer, and I hadn't asked either of the patrons of this, so I apologize in advance. If this peer-to-peer platform, or the people that are lending out their cars, it wouldn't prevent me from being an independent enterprise. I could own 5 cars and then conduct my own business by leasing out these cars or renting or doing an app or Grubhub or whatever for my car, right? I mean, what would prevent me from buying a fleet of cars?
That's what they do.
Delegate Ayala, is there somebody who can respond to Delegate Ayala's question?
Sorry.
Trey Adams,
Mr. Adams.
on behalf of Turo. We're the peer-to-peer platform people are talking
Yeah.
about. It exists.
Sorry, I didn't have
It's
your
okay.
name.
It exists an app on your phone. First, I want to thank the folks at DMV who ran the meetings all summer. Most of that substitute you've got is agreed to language about the rules, and a lot of folks worked hard on that. We're here about the money.
He's talking about 1539, guys.
question is the tax the tax transaction that's occurring. When enterprise, and there are some exceptions if they let employees use it or borrow it, but by and large, they buy the vehicle to rent. And just like we don't charge the contractor sales tax on the lumber he puts into your home, we don't charge sales tax on the car they're going to rent full time. But when you and I buy a car, we pay the sales tax when we register it. Somebody said something about apples and apples. This is clearly not an apples and apples situation because we've got front end taxes, we've got personal property taxes, and on the back end in the rental world, you've got a 10% rental car tax. The work of the group was to try to take those two concepts and come up with something that evened the total tax burden. Because rather than talking about who pays what, as we all know, it's the customer that pays the tax in the end. The rate that my platform user, somebody who's out of town for 2 weeks and wants to rent his car, is focused on is what did it cost to get in that car? And it costs him, on average, $1,000 more to get his car than it did enterprise because we pay that tax up front. So the 6% is a way to try to even things out when admittedly it's not apples and apples because of the two different tax structures. That's really what the discussion's about.
Okay, there was a question from Delegate Scott,
I guess
and
my-
then we will turn to the public again.
A couple of questions. I mean, I guess my first question or observation is, there's no guarantee that any of these vehicles were purchased in Virginia, so it's likelihood that Virginia didn't get any tax from this. From this
Plated in Maryland right now.
So why are we having this conversation when we can't guarantee that the vehicle that's put in the peer-to-peer network was purchased in Virginia? So there's no guarantee that we got a dime off the purchase of this car that was put in there.
Delegate Scott, was that the question addressed to a specific member?
I guess can somebody answer that question?
Delegate Jones, and then let me, after this question, we're gonna ask the public for one last opportunity to speak for or against either measure, and then we need to move on because we have a lot of bills left on the docket.
All I would say, and I think Nicole's probably gonna say this too, is that when you get a rental car, most of the time, your plates are not from Virginia either. And so I think that is.
Most of the time.
Delegate, Sickles, did you want to respond to that?
I think that committee will learn a lot by all these witnesses that wanna talk to you,
Okay, so let's do this. We're running out of time. I'd like to keep the conversation as brief as possible. I'd like to ask the clerk if she could put up we never use a there is it. There's a timer there. It's a 2-minute timer. To be fair, 2 minutes for those that are in, well, actually, it's not favor or against because we have two measures. Why don't we have everybody who would like to speak to either measure, whichever position you take, and let's give, since we have a group, can we make 4 minutes for everybody total? At the end of this 4-minute public comment period, we're gonna be back at the subcommittee and we'll take some votes on these measures.
Two for Sickles and 2 for Jones.
Yeah, so that's 4 minutes total.
Yeah, but if you.
Oh, okay, so 2 minutes for those that wanna speak in favor of the Jones measure, 2 minutes that are in favor of the Sickles measure, and then let's go from there. 2 minutes for Jones. In favor of Jones.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Nicole Brenner Reed Smith on behalf of General Motors and Maven. I'll address a couple of questions. Delegate Ayala, to your point on the chart, the 10%, 6% is a different tax than what's shown on there. The reason the rental car companies are shown as $0 on there is because they are exempt. I think that's what has been explained. And Delegate Ware, to your question about who owes the tax is owed by the owner of the vehicle. That's who's established as the rentor in the tax. Now it may be passed through to the person using the service, but the person that owes it is the person owning the vehicle. So that is why the lower tax rate creates parity. A couple issues with Delegate Sickles' bills. Want to speak to the stakeholder process. Over the summer, we participated in the DMV stakeholder process, but we also worked out with insurance and VOI all of the issues that are taken care of in Delegate Jones's bill, and those are not addressed in Delegate Sickles' bill, so there would be a number of insurance. In speaking to your substitute, Delegate Sickles, it's not addressed in the substitute. There are several insurance issues that would need to be addressed in the substitute. On the tax, I wanted to also speak to the peer-to-peer, the personal property tax. There's already in a code section that says you should receive a reduced rate on the personal property tax, so that's what makes the localities whole in Delegate Sickles' bill.
Anybody else speaking to House Bill 1539?
Turo's in favor of the Jones bill, and I'll let the insurance folks take the balance.
This is like Super Bowl last night.
Yep.
Clock is ticking.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Chris Legault for the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. I know that you want to focus on the tax rate as is appropriate for this committee, but you need to understand one thing about the insurance piece. It's very important because
So should we assume you're not gonna
insurers,
focus on the tax piece?
insurers entered into an agreement.
Add a little more time for that.
Insurers entered into an agreement with the platforms nationally when this business model came forward, not unlike what happened in the TNC situation about 5 years ago. What we wanted to do was to make sure, because we don't underwrite for perfect strangers. We underwrite for the owner of the vehicle and the members of their household, okay? When a perfect stranger comes in the mix, surely there will be claims, and the claims need to be properly paid for and the risk transferred to the platform, not on the owner's policy, who hasn't driven the car, didn't cause the accident, none of the above. So the language has been carefully worked out and assigns the responsibility for liability to the platforms during that discrete period of time when the car is being shared. It doesn't eliminate coverage, it merely transfers the liability risk to the proper person. That's the platform.
So, thank you, Mr. Legault.
Thank
Now,
you.
we're gonna turn to House Bill, I know it's on the board, House Bill, Delegate Sickles' bill. 129, Delegate Sickles' bill.
There's one more on this.
Oops, wrong one, wrong bill, I apologize.
It's
Eight
not-
ninety-one,
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was under the support for the Jones bill.
Okay,
It's Fred
and
Helm.
just tell us who you are, which
Yes, sir.
organization.
Fred
and
Helm
then-
on behalf of the Alliance for Automobile Innovation, that's the car manufacturers, our association has merged.
Thank
We
you.
also participated in the
Okay,
stakeholder
thank you.
group. and
So,
asked you to
we're now gonna hear
support
the public,
Jones bill.
from the public on the Sickles bill, and because we gave some extra time, we'll go about 2.5 minutes.
I'll be quick, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tommy Lucas with the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association. Our dealers are very large clients of Enterprise, pay the 10% now. VADA has, for our insurance agency, rents out cars, pays the 10%. Couple of big things. Number one, when you buy a car, you pay the sales and use tax for personal use, but you also pay personal property tax, as we've talked about every year. Average car in Virginia, 11.8 years old. Before that time, you would get more than everything you paid in sales and use tax back in the form of car tax relief. So that's number one. Number two, if there were to be a discounted rate, nothing would stop these platforms from titling a fleet of vehicles in another state, bringing them into Virginia, and then operating just as Enterprise does, but on a discounted rate. In North Carolina, sales and use tax is 3% compared to the 4.15 here. So it would make financial sense to do that out of state, bring it into Virginia. Virginia never receives that justification that's being used now. And for those reasons, we don't see any reason for there to be a tax break. Thanks.
All right, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Neil Manx, representing Virginia Municipal League. Our problem with, we support Sickles' bill. We think it will preserve the public policy purpose. You know, 40% of that money goes to localities. It's paying for education. It's paying for public safety. 40% goes to state transportation programs. The reduction in that tax rate is going to hurt you in terms of the metro capital. It's going to hurt you in terms of rail enhancement. It's going to hurt you in terms of allocations to other transportation modes. Finally, 20% of that, the money under the current policy goes to pay for the Department of State Police STAR system, which is it links up all the telecommunication agency, telecommunication services of law enforcement. We don't think there's a clear, overriding, compelling public purpose for reducing this tax rate, not compared to what that money is now being used for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a
Anybody
long-
else?
Mr. Chairman, Chris McDonald with the Virginia Association of Counties. I just want to associate my comments with those of Mr. Minks and reiterate that this is a matter of fundamental fairness, and as such, we're proud to support Delegate Sickles.
Bill, thank you. Anybody else?
Tommy Gerber with Enterprise Holdings. I wanted to answer your question. The discussions in the work study over the summer, where the lack of agreement came on taxes was because of the definition of what peer-to-peer sharing is. These are not mom and pop garage startups. They are companies who are valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. They've been in operation for a decade, and they are backed by vehicle manufacturers, insurance companies, and venture capitalists. The definition could not be reached for a tax compromise because the definition couldn't be limited to private individuals who are making their vehicles available on the platform. It includes large fleet owners. If you go out to these platforms today, you will find vehicles being rented on the platforms that are owned by vehicle manufacturing companies, vehicle dealership companies, and others. Thank you.
All right, for the rest of the folks in the line, can you just tell us your name and your organization? Because I'm assuming you're all in favor of House Bill 891, is that right? Just tell us your name and your organization, that way we at least know that you're here.
Lisa Guthrie, Virginia Transit Association. We support Delegate Sickles' bill because it retains the funding
Thank
for
you.
transportation. Any reduction in the mass
Thank you.
transit fund would affect
Thank
our
you. Thank you.
ability to leverage federal funds.
Claudia Arco with Fairfax County, and we support the Sickles bill.
Thank you.
Danny Plugger with Virginians for High School. David Halleck on behalf of Hertz, and there's no reason to give a tax break to the large private
Thank
equity out-of-state companies.
Anybody else? Okay, so we're back to the subcommittee. I think we've heard plenty on both sides, and I'm sure there's plenty of questions still left. Are there any questions among the subcommittee members that are just burning questions you have to know right now before we take action on this measure? If not, the committee will start with House Bill 891, which is on the board.
Move to report.
Second. There's a motion to report, there's a second. With a substitute. House Bill 891, report with a substitute. All those,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just speak to that.
Doug, where?
There's been reference made several times to this stakeholder conversation that went on. While they did not achieve a consensus, the staff recommendation from DMV after hearing from all the stakeholders was basically in favor of it. That's what I've been given to understand.
Okay, so that is, there's a difference of opinion, but we just don't have time to be debating that question right now. It's a conversation among members. Any other questions or comments speaking to the motion that's probably before us?
Substitute motion. Pass by for the day. And if I could speak to that motion, and I don't say that.
Second the motion.
Second.
And I don't make that motion lightly. We're supposed to be responsible in our dispatching of these matters, and we need to do it with a true understanding of the matters before us. If you give me I'm a trial lawyer, but if you give me a 25-page and followed by a 15-page, and you expect me in the span of 5 minutes to really know the issue, I won't. And I will tell you in all of what I've heard, and even during that point in time where I had to get up and take a mental health break, and all of what I've heard, the only thing I can say to you is that I'm more confused than I am understanding. I believe there are a lot of good-minded people with a lot of good ideas, but I'm clueless as to what is what.
Okay, so the motion before us is to pass by for the day, properly seconded.
This is our last meeting.
Yeah, this is the last meeting. That is a substitute motion in front of us, that has precedent. And that is a voice vote.
Correct.
So, all those in favor of the motion to pass by House Bill 891 shall indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Noes?
No.
Noes seem to have it. The noes do have it.
I know they were louder, but
Well,
divisions.
do you want to, all right, so those in favor of passing by House Bill 891 shall indicate with your right hand. Raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those who are opposed shall indicate by the same sign. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be 4, 4. So the motion to pass by fails. So we're back to the underlying motion, which was motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
parliamentary.
Yes. Delegate Byers.
So, if a motion to pass this by, is that gonna be the same motion for the next bill, where we're not gonna
I
deal
would
with
make the
this
same
at all?
motion.
Yeah.
I don't plan on treating them differently.
So
Was
we
that
are.
okay without the patrons to pass
Well,
by?
it's not
No.
the patrons, it's up to the subcommittee.
It's the last meeting.
So
This is the last
we are back to the motion to report, which was the underlying
But
motion before the
still deal with
substitute.
it in a full committee, right?
Yes.
There was, that motion to report was with the substitute was made, properly seconded. The clerk will open the roll. Was there a motion? Yeah, there was. No, that was a substitute. So the motion to report with a substitute is, I guess either way, either way it fails. So I'll do another second. The motion to report with a substitute fails on a 3-6 vote, and we will turn to House Bill, what was the other, 1539, which is the other measure. Clerk will open the roll on that. Oh. No, sorry. Was there a motion for House Bill 1539?
Also a sub.
With a substitute.
It's a 500,000 this.
All right.
No.
My motion is still to pass by for the day, so.
This, what,
the motion is to pass by House Bill 1539. Is there a second? Second. So the motion is passed by, properly seconded. Those in
Mr. Chairman, substitute motion to report.
Second.
The substitute motion is to report. Motion, I thought buy for the day is a higher precedent. Yeah. So let's take the buy for the day, just to be fair with the last one, we call that to be a precedent. So the motion right now is buy for the day. Those in favor shall say aye.
Aye.
Those against?
No.
Do you wanna call division?
I'd like to say division.
Division, okay. So those who would, vote in favor of passing by House Bill 1539 shall indicate with your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh,
Those,
I'm sorry, I
I'm
think that was 5.
That was
Give me
fine.
your hand.
1,
Hands
2,
down.
3, 4.
You can have your hand up.
I
No.
have it up now.
Okay.
But I saw Vivian raise hers.
No,
So
I'm
I can count.
Corey. I'm voting.
Well, Vivian for Corey, okay.
Those who oppose the motion to passing by for the day shall indicate with your same hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that motion also fails as well, 4 to 4. So now we're back to the other motion that the gentleman was about to make, which is
Move to report.
With a
So,
substitute?
1539 with a
So the
substitute.
motion right now is to move House Bill
Mr. Chairman.
1539 with a substitute. Yes,
It has a
sir.
$500,000 fist to it, so it should be
He's-
reported as
So
appropriations.
Delegate, thank you for the reminder. I don't have the notes in front of me, but I think just out of deference to the fact that we're treating a lot of these budget bills in the same posture. If there was a motion to report, it would be the motion to report and to refer this measure to appropriations with a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, if you permit me, I would move to report and refer.
Thank you.
Substitute.
There was a second to that. So, further questions? If not, the board will reflect that. The motion is to report and to refer with a substitute to appropriations. All in favor, will vote on the machine. Yes.
Number 4. That's 5. Oh, okay.
Well, I guess it's already on the regular calendar. It's already on the regular. So, the vote closes at 7 to 2. The motion to report and to refer this to appropriations is successful. The next bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the
Thank you,
committee.
both gentlemen. Again, for the members of the public, that was an unusual procedural matter, which is why it took a lot longer than we wanted to spend, but out of deference to both of our patrons, we wanted to spend as much time as possible. Good? Delegate, we got another bill. One more bill.
Well, now that it's upstairs, I don't know, but, this bill is simply the tax rate. This is to require the tax rate to be applied, and that was the most discussed issue in this last one, but this one just, doesn't hurt localities, doesn't hurt our transportation funds, and it applies the 10% tax rate, that's all it does. And, 892.
892, okay, so House Bill 892 is probably before us. Are there any amendments to this one, or is it just as is?
I think there are some line amendments, yes,
Are
sir.
there some line amendments? Could we report line amendments, please? All right, so while the line amendments are being presented, are there any questions to what the delegate Sickles announced? If not, let's get back to the line amendments. There are 2 line amendments to be accepted.
Move the amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second to the line amendments? Is there a second to the line amendments? Is there a second to the line amendments?
Second.
Okay, thank you. So,
Substitute motion.
wait, hold on. No, we're doing line amendments right now.
Substitute motion.
On the line amendments?
No, line amendments.
You want the line amendment? Okay, all right, then I'm sorry.
Delegate, so,
I'll accommodate him on the line amendment. Second.
We'll just say, okay. So are there any further discussion? If not, we will adopt the line amendments without objection. Line amendments are accepted. Now, the delegate, Lindsay, you have a question?
I'll defer to Delegate Scott.
At the patrons' request, I move to carry this over.
Second.
Just to clarify, carry this over to 2021 under
Yes.
Rule 22?
Yes.
Okay. So, properly seconded. Any further discussions? If not, yeah, this is a voice vote.
As amended.
As amended.
So,
Carry over as
the
amended.
motion was to carry over under Rule 22 with, the amendments. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The motion carries over till 2021 session. Now, we are back to.
What do we do with him?
So, we're gonna, I know we're running out of time. We have Delegate Wampler, who's been patiently waiting, and then after that, we have Delegate Wilt, and then we'd like to turn to Chairman Watts for her bill, 1555. So, Delegate Wampler, Delegate Wilt, Chairman Watts, and then, hey, LaRock's back. And then Delegate LaRock. Delegate Wampler, House Bill 1146.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 1146 is a little complicated. Kind of sitting here thinking maybe we should just abolish 58.1 and all go home and shut this whole thing down, but,
I move it.
So anyway, let me talk generally about the bill before we get into the meat and the specifics of the line items in it. If you think about economic development in Virginia, traditionally done by going out, recruiting companies from out of the state, bringing them back into Virginia, offering them a tax incentive, offering them property tax abatements, maybe a specific tax incentive for whatever type of industry it is. I think that's great. We should be doing that. Every other state in the union is doing that, competing in traditional economic development over companies. What this bill gets at is a way to incentivize our existing companies already here in Virginia and operating, employing Virginians to grow by means of extending them a tax credit. The tax credit itself is a new provision in the code which would apply to existing businesses. There's a qualifying period. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. It gets confusing a little bit, but we'll try to walk through this for you.
And Delegate Wampler, just, I was reminded that earlier in the process today, we announced that any bills that have budget impact, we're gonna try to limit the conversation because either it'll move up to appropriations or we may not be able to move forward, so, go ahead.
With the quick summation I've already given you, getting into the meat of the bill, it is a 5% income tax credit on any revenue, or excuse me, any taxable income found under 58.1320 or 400. That's individual income tax and corporate income tax. Basically what the bill does is it sets up brackets of companies by size. As you'll see in the bill, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, and 50 to 100. And what it asks, what it requires to get this tax credit is for companies of those different sizes to add full-time employees to their roles. And if they do that over the qualifying period of 2 years, then they will receive this 5% income tax credit on their taxable income. That's probably as simple as I can make it. If anybody has any questions on the mechanics of the bill, I'd be happy to speak to them. I know we're short on
Sure.
time.
Do we have any questions from the subcommittee members to Delegate Wampler? Anybody in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Anybody wishing to speak against House Bill 1146? Anybody need more coffee? I do. Okay, so, yeah, we're back to the subcommittee for, consideration. Anybody in the subcommittee wishing to address this, speak, and or motions? Going once, going twice, hearing no motions, this bill remains in our subcommittee. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Wampler.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the next one was Delegate Wilt, and we'll keep this also as a 2-minute bill because of the budget impact. Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, you have a substitute before you.
Of course there's a substitute. Every one of the bills has a substitute.
Everybody has a substitute.
All right, so Delegate Wilt, as the substitute's being passed out, why don't you just give us a brief summary of what it does and then close.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm attempting to do here is to establish an enhanced tax credit for best management practices, implementation for those practices that fall under a resource management plan that a farmer has agreed to implement. I'll note to the committee that this is a step that is provided in the governor's WIP 3 plan that's coming forward. This is one of the tools that would in there. And so simply put, that's it's just an aid to try to help farmers. Some farmers don't like the current system we have, the cost share process, and so this is just simply another tool to try to bring folks on board. As we may know, you don't hear much discussion about the WIP 3, but for our farmers, there's going to come a day of reckoning. They can step up, or they're going to get stepped on. Yeah. And so this is just another tool to help them. So.
All right, thank you, Delegate. Any questions from the subcommittee to the delegates? Delegate Fowler.
Quick, Mr. Chairman, Doug Wilt, I did,
have a fiscal impact on this? Is there?
Yeah, there's no fiscal impact in the back, but in all honesty, because it's a tax credit, DCR estimates that, you know, with and I'm not honestly sure I can say at what level of participation, but it could be as much as $5 million worth of credits over the biennium.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure, Doug,
I
no
would
comment.
say this about the bill. I've talked to a number of farmers in my district who really would like to try to implement some BMPs, and of course the response I get back to those folks is the current cost share is insufficient for them to jump into the ball game. And again, and I've always maintained, as far as their environmental bang for the buck, this BMP program is I think clearly one of the best, and you know, so I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with the delegate that, you know, current is like 25%, this goes to 75%.
Doug, just a quick question. I know that the governor has a measure this year that deals with the WHIP, and we both serve on the agriculture committee, so we've seen a lot of action on this. Do we know if the administration has taken a position on your measure, or any opinions about that?
Mr. Chairman, I do not know, but I know in what the governor's doing, in trying, you know, the current measures, putting money in, moving us in the right direction, if you will, but we're still about $100 million short of where we need to be on the needs assessment.
Well, I told the delegate that I appreciate his efforts on this. I share your concerns. I think this is certainly a creative way to address that and provide some relief for our farmers that they desperately need. I also think that based on the fact that we're working on this WHIP management proposal that the governor has proposed, this may be something that they can consider as part of that conversation, but maybe not, from my perspective, maybe not using the tax code for this, but to kind of look at this from a comprehensive perspective of, are there some ways we can find some other funding and or subsidizing the costs that they have. I'm personally torn because I like the idea. I just don't think that we're using the tax credit and the tax policy is the right way to achieve that goal. And that's just my personal views. And we are back to the subcommittee. I don't think we heard anybody from the public. Is there anybody wishing to speak in favor or opposed? Oh, there are some. Oh, good.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Ben Rose speaking on behalf of Virginia Farm Bureau. We support the bill. I'll be brief and just say this is another tool in the toolbox that farmers can use to put these practices on the ground and help us meet our water quality goals, which are due by 2025, so we have limited time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Beck Stanley for the Virginia Agribusiness Council. We support the bill.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, Kendall Tyree with the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Echo the comments.
Thank you. Anybody who would like to speak against the measure or dare to? All right. Then we're back to the subcommittee on House Bill 1652.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I agree 100% with your expression of your dividedness on this. I am very much the same way. And I'll add one other thing, is that if we were to adopt this, which I'm going to vote to do, but if we were to adopt this, it would also have the unfortunate consequence of, in effect, hiding some of the cost of the WHIP in a tax credit program, as opposed to a flat-out statement of the real cost to our folks. So
that's a good point. Delegate Watts.
And before we vote, I can only echo what Chairman Ware has said, that spending this amount of money in a tax credit that is hidden, as opposed to taking that amount of money in the budget, appropriating it to the program, I think is far better, both accountability and bang for the buck.
That's right. Any further conversations or discussions from the members of the subcommittee? If not, the motion will be in order. And I would just say, if we were to move this in a positive direction, I think the proper motion would be to report that to refer this to appropriations so that upstairs folks can. Delegate Campbell makes that motion to refer and refer with the, oh no, was it a substitute? Yeah.
Yes.
Report and refer the substitute to appropriations and second it. All in favor, will report on the machine. The vote to report and to refer with to substitute to appropriations is successful on a 4-2 vote. And thank you, Delegate, for your efforts on this measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We are going to turn to Delegate Watts, who has a very, very important bill. And then after that, I believe Delegate LaRocque is the last person in the room. Yeah. All
And
right.
is it a substitute or amendment?
Amendment. Delegate Watson has amendments to House Bill 1555. And there are simple line amendments, so I think we should just adopt this so the delegate can start our conversation.
So moved.
Line amendments move to accept the line amendments. Do we have a second? Follow, do we have a second on these line amendments?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposed. The line amendments are accepted. Delegate Watts, House Bill 1555.
All right, and House Bill 1555 reinstitutes the employer income and corporate tax deduction for commuter expenses. The line amendment makes it very clear that we are only talking about transit and ride sharing. We are not talking about parking, we're not talking about single-use vehicles, so it's very much oriented towards the concerns of CO2, quite frankly. As well as, quite frankly, in urban areas, congestion, trying to get people, because the cost of lane miles is so much more expensive than trying to get people into occupant vehicles.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So if we, adopt this, I might be able to get from my house to Maine a lot faster when we're going through DC, is that what you're saying?
From the beginning, we address congestion, we don't solve congestion.
Yeah, but at least
Never
you're
above
addressing it.
promise.
That is good,
But this
very
is
good.
an important way of getting employers to back that kind of ride sharing.
All right, any other questions to our patrons? Anybody in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Ms.
Mr.
Guthrie,
Chairman,
yes.
Lisa Guthrie with the Virginia Transit Association, and we thank the delegate for bringing this issue forward. This, as you said, reinstates what had been in place before the 2017 tax changes, and this specifically addresses transit and qualified ride sharing. It helps our businesses, it's an incentive for business to come here, makes us competitive with our neighboring states because North Carolina and Maryland offer this as well as even credits. So we feel that this is something that would incentivize employment as well as traffic congestion mitigation. Thank you.
All right, any further the member of the public, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Greg Foster of Washington Echo. We support the bill and think, as Lisa was saying, that it would provide some good incentives for transit. Thank you.
Move the report and refer.
There's a motion to report and refer this measure to appropriations as amended. As been seconded. Those in favor, vote on the board. And
I will vote.
All right, so the close the roll, 6-1, the measure reports and refers. And David LaRock is our last delegate who has a bill here, but just before we lose quorum, I want to just announce a couple of administrative measures. I believe Delegate Willett, House Bill 633, at the request of the patron, he would like the bill to be stricken, so we would have
So
to.
moved.
We have to go to the board. House, strike 633, properly seconded, to strike from the docket. House Bill 633 is stricken from the docket. Close the roll. The other bill, House Bill 1358, Delegate Weberts, he is not here. I know he's stuck in the committee, and he had indicated to me earlier that he may or may not be able to make it. And also House Bill 469, patron is Delegate Keane. I think I'm going to keep those two bills in the committee. Obviously, today's the last meeting, so if we don't get to it, we don't get to it. But since the other patrons, I'm sorry, Helmer? 1295. And then there's a Helmer 1295. Let's put that in the same posture. Since those three bills we did not get to today, we'll just keep it in the committee, which obviously means that unless there's another meeting, we're done for the year. Delegate LaRock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Very simple proposition here. House Bill 631 proposes making tolls a deductible expense. And I'll point out what I think are three benefits to that. First off, I think we're all aware that the distance between affordable housing and good-paying jobs is continuously growing throughout the Commonwealth. This strains families, strains budgets, and people end up sitting in traffic on secondary roads if they can't afford tolls. So that's the first one. The second one is that this would incentivize getting people to higher paying jobs, and in doing so, generate taxable income, which would help offset the cost of a deduction. And the third benefit is that this will incentivize the use of toll roads, which will help free up volume on secondary roads and lessen the need to build costly new roads and other types of infrastructure. This would, tolls often benefit different modes of transportation, including transit, and so this would benefit not only drivers, potential toll road users, but those who use transit as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude.
Great. Thank you, Delegate LaRocque, and thanks for coming back. Is there any question from the subcommittee to Delegate LaRocque's bill? 631. Delegate Ware.
This is probably a question for tax, and I know the fiscal impact statement says that it's an unknown negative general fund revenue impact. Do we have any sense of how many tollway commuters there are in the Commonwealth, just to get some ballpark idea of?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Winter, not this time. We did try to find more
Look at the
data,
door in the
but,
back.
we just weren't able to find this one.
Pause for 1 second. Can you just close the door in the back there,
It
please?
would seem to me that the
Thanks.
toll roads would have a tracking numbers for that, to get some sense of the.
I think we could probably get that information. We'll figure it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Any other questions from the committee members? Any other comments, questions from the members of the public on this measure? If not, we're back to the subcommittee. What's the pleasure?